Welcome everyone, they call me IntroTechOut, and most age ratings for video games are stupid. In this video I hope to show a couple of insane examples and give my opinion on how ratings could be improved to the point where they are actually useful. I will also go in depth on my opinions on kids and violent video games and why I think everyone's a bit too overprotective these days. I do want to make clear in advance that I understand age ratings are mainly there so the industry can regulate itself and governments don't have to step in. But even though that means age ratings probably won't change anytime soon, well, that doesn't change the fact they're often ridiculous and I still want to talk about them. So where to begin? Well, first of all, I'm mainly going to talk about the European age rating board, PEGI, because I'm the most familiar with them. They differ from the American version, the ESRB, by focusing on ages instead of phases of someone's life. So no M for matures and T for teens, just 18 pluses and 12 pluses. When I compared the two age rating systems, a thing I noticed is that even though the ESRB and PEGI both have three age categories someone can fall into from teen to adult, the 18 plus adult only rating from the ESRB is almost never used, while the 18 plus rating from PEGI is used a lot. The reason why there are barely any adult only ratings is because all three major consoles, PlayStation, Xbox and Nintendo, do not allow games with the adult only rating at all, while the 18 plus from PEGI does get allowed. This is quite interesting because that would mean that if you made a game as adult as possible with all the worst possible things in it, but only released in Europe, Sony could possibly allow it as 18 plus is the highest possible rating from PEGI. They probably have some policy in place to prevent that from happening. But this all brings me to the reason why I wanted to make this video to begin with. To show just how ridiculously sensitive PEGI is when it comes to rating games. To prove this, I'm going to name off every physical PS4 game I own with an 18 plus rating. GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, Watch Dogs, Killzone Shadowfall, God of War, Batman Arkham Knight, Dishonored 2, Just Cause 3, The Witcher 3, Rainbow Six Siege and Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Now of course these games aren't the most family friendly games of all time, especially games like GTA and The Witcher. But 18 years old, that's absolute insanity. Especially if you compare this to movies, which are being rated way more fairly. To put that into perspective, in my country 16 plus is the absolute highest rating a movie can get, and this is pretty reasonable in my opinion. I do think most 14-year-olds can easily handle those movies as well, but if these rating boards want to play it a bit safe, I'm fine with that. Then we have PEGI, who hands out a 16 plus rating for Star Wars Battlefront only a few months before the movie Deadpool gets the exact same rating. This is Deadpool. This is Battlefront. As you can see, Deadpool is pretty much as adult as you can get. Using Deadpool as our comparison, you can easily see how crazy high most game ratings are. Because according to PEGI, Uncharted 4 is as bad as Deadpool, Horizon Zero Dawn is as bad as Deadpool, Titanfall 2 is as bad as Deadpool, and Mirror's Edge Catalyst is as bad as Deadpool. Like I mentioned earlier though, most games actually get an 18 plus rating from PEGI, which means many of the games that get released are considered to be even more adult than Deadpool. A 17-year-old can literally go to the cinema, watch a movie with nudity, extreme violence, blood and gore, drug use and much more, but he will still technically be too young to play Just Cause 3 or Rainbow Six Siege. There's more to the PEGI ratings than just the age though. I don't know if the ESRB does this as well, but PEGI always has a couple of indicators next to the age rating itself to show what kind of content the game features and what parents need to watch out for. The problem here is that these indicators are so vague they might as well not be on the box. The indicator that shows this most clearly is violence. Violence is such a vague term that the only game I could find that didn't have this on the box were racing games. Of course games like GTA have violence on the back, but games like Little Big Planet and the Lego games do too. This makes the indicator more or less completely useless, unless you're such a worried parent that you don't want your kids to inflict any virtual harm to any virtual thing at all. But the weirdest thing is that while violence is overused and PEGI is generally really sensitive when it comes to age ratings, they at the same time seem to be extremely reluctant to put some of the heavier indicators on games. For example, The Witcher 3 only has bad language and violence on the box, while the game also has plenty of nudity and the game features a lot of discrimination and racism, though admittedly the racism is against races that don't exist in real life. Meanwhile, I'm also baffled GTA 5 doesn't have the indicator for drugs on the box, as there are plenty references to drugs in the game. I mean, you're literally playing a drug dealer. One of the biggest hypocritical things I've seen with these rating boards though has to do with the topic of gambling. When I did research on the topic of adult-only ratings from the ESRB, I saw that the only game that ever received an adult-only rating that didn't have to do with violence or nudity was a gambling game where you could gamble with real money. What a shocker, right? Imagine a game where you gamble with real money. Oh. I think it's very clear that loot boxes use the same kind of psychological manipulation that casinos are notorious for, and I really wish rating boards like the ESRB and PEGI would take a stance against them. Unfortunately, we have seen they don't actually care about the consumer, but rather the big corporations who apparently still don't have enough money yet. This time the age rating boards are losing the war though. Now governments are slowly stepping in to fight loot boxes, which is totally deserved as far as I'm concerned. But so far I've mainly talked about why age ratings in their current form are ridiculous from a more factual standpoint. There's also a more general conversation to be had about the need for age ratings in the first place though. That conversation is a lot more based on personal feelings, but still I'd like to give my opinion on this topic as well, so that's what I will go into now. Because I feel that we as a society have become increasingly worse at estimating how hard it actually is to manipulate kids into believing something irrational. Matter of fact, people these days are pretending like kids are so easily convinced of everything that they want to censor anyone who might even have a vague connection to groups we consider immoral. They pretend like if a child as much as catches a glimpse of someone making fun of Hitler on the internet, the kid will immediately turn against their own nature, their own biology and psychology, to become a hateful Nazi who wants to violently and inhumanely kill innocent human beings because of their beliefs. But also outside of the political wars that are raging on in the background, society in general seems to be really scared of letting kids experience any negative interactions at all, even if we're talking about virtual violence in video games. Of course, the topic of school shootings is really sensitive in the US, and I won't even touch that subject with a 10-meter long stick, but I want to point out that Fortnite has garnered over 200 million players at this point, which means that a lot of new kids have gotten an introduction to shotguns, assault rifles and pistols. Last time I checked, the amount of shootings hasn't suddenly seen a spike after people started playing this game. Of course, it's only a matter of time before something serious happens and it's blamed on Fortnite, but it probably won't be supported by any evidence. The fact remains though that kids are much stronger than they let on to be. Shielding them from things like curse words and violence in video games doesn't achieve anything except that they will now use and search for those things without the parents knowing it. I distinctly remember a scenario like that with Halo. My parents were at the time totally okay with me playing most video games, though they did want me to stay away from realistic shooters. This is of course what a lot of the parents of the generation felt like, because Call of Duty has been so misrepresented by the media. So because I knew the game Halo Combat Evolved, in which I was interested, was a shooter and had on top of that a lot of blood in it, I didn't bother to ask my parents' permission and downloaded the demo secretly so I could play when they weren't home. This simply will happen when a parent is unreasonable to their children about what they think they can handle. Whether they want it or not, a kid from 10 to 14 years old these days can and will get access to everything the parents want them to stay away from. The only choice the parents have is to educate them from beforehand to guide them in the right direction, or to stay ignorant and believe their child is completely innocent. But as you could guess, in the end, playing Halo did not change my opinion on gun violence or make me more aggressive. I'm glad my parents understood this as well once they found out what I was up to and allowed me to play the game even online with friends. But if Halo Combat Evolved was so mild, why was the game rated 16+? I cannot for the life of me imagine a world where I wouldn't have been able to handle the game as anything other than a 12-year-old. That's where the problem lies for me, because I think age ratings still have a place in the gaming, but these current ones are useless. I'm of the opinion that parents should be able to get useful information about the content of a game from these ratings so they can decide if their kids are allowed to play the game. The problem is that currently these ratings are completely useless because they are so ridiculously high. A parent might notice their 9-year-old son can easily handle Star Wars Battlefront, which is rated 16+, so they conclude he can probably handle the 16+ Spider-Man PS4 as well, not realizing that that game has some pretty gruesome scenes and is a lot more serious than Battlefront. But why would this be a problem after I just stated that kids can handle much more than we give them credit for? Well, fear. One reason why we should still be at least a bit restrictive with the content kids consume is that they have a wild imagination and their perception of reality isn't always fully realistic. Seeing too adult things at a too young age can create an image that stays in their mind for a long time, making them anxious or scared. I myself, for example, remember being scared of a picture of a certain robot in a drawing book called 50 Robots to Draw in Paint. It was like a tutorial book to draw realistic robots. There was this one robot in the book which was really organic, with pieces of flesh covering his body, and his head consisted of 2 human brains sewed together. The picture on the screen is from that book, though not the robot I'm talking about. Still, it may give you an idea of how horrifying that picture was to my 8-year-old or so brain. And even though I knew it was just a picture, that image still stayed in my mind and gave me a lot of dark thoughts. That's what actually can be damaging to the mental well-being of children. It's not the mindless violence, it's horror, it's the scary images, the implication that real people got hurt, the idea that this might happen to you as well. It's the cutscenes and the story, not the gameplay. I remember Splinter Cell Blacklist, where I had no problem slicing throats left and right, where I continued to shoot and blow up enemies without remorse. Then near the end of the game, there was a cutscene of an innocent guy getting tortured by getting his fingers and other limbs cut off one by one. That's what I had to wrestle with going to bed that night, not the fact that I planted my virtual knife and landed my virtual bullets into a couple dozen enemies. This is a point where I want to talk about how PEGI could improve their age rating system to be more in line with what I think is important. Because this wouldn't be an intro tech out video if I didn't try offering a solution. So first of all, the pure existence of violence in a particular game should no longer have any say in how a game is rated, and the violence indicator should be retired. Because it's not the violence itself that is a problem, it's the level to which that violence makes us empathize with the beings on which the violence is inflicted. Or at least that's my opinion. As you hopefully understand though, it's really hard to give proper definitions to these emotions and gut feelings. It would be great if we could objectively say, okay, if you shoot at other humanoids, rate it this, but if you can only punch them, rate it this. The truth is that we simply can't. There will always be a grey area when it comes to this sort of thing. What kind of indicators could be used though to give parents a better idea of the content of a game? First of all, blood and gore. Now this is where my limitations with the English language lie, but what I mean is not necessarily blood, as I think blood splatters or a red puff of smoke when you hit enemies are not damaging to kids at all. I'm thinking more about the realism after someone has been killed in a game. So this one asks the question if realistic bullet holes are left in enemies, for example, like in Watch Dogs, or if you can blow off their limbs like in The Order 1886. The second indicator that could be used is torture. Now that word sounds a bit extreme for what I'm trying to achieve with this indicator, but once again I can't come up with a better one at this moment. This torture indicator should be about how characters react to the harm that is inflicted on them and should give an indication of how mature the story and cutscenes are. Besides these new indicators for violence, I want PEGI to retire the 18+ rating, or at least reserve it for only the worst offenders, like the adult-only rating from the ESRB. Like I alluded to earlier, I'm of the opinion that 16 years is pretty much the age when, video game wise at least, everything should be allowed, as you're almost completely developed at that age. I should mention though that of course, age, like most things in nature, is a spectrum, not a hard line you can cross. It's like asking from what exact point the color dark green becomes the color light green, or at what exact temperature you go from feeling hot to feeling cold. You can point out these things separately when asked, but you can't narrow it down to a single line. When talking age ratings, this is the same, which brings us to a dilemma. Should we place the age rating at the point where, say, 70% of people can handle the content, or the point where 95% can? If we take the first one, I think 13+ could be the highest possible rating, while the latter would mean that the earlier proposed 16+ would be the norm. I feel like 15+ would also be a fine highest rating, but that might be me falling for this spectrum trap. The easiest way to make PEGI ratings at least a bit more realistic is to downgrade every rating on the current game's one category. This would make games like Uncharted and Horizon Zero Dawn 12+, while making games like Watch Dogs and The Witcher 3 16+. There are still some outliers though. Star Wars Battlefront should for example go from 16+ to 9+, and Just Cause 3 should go from 18+ to 12+, in my opinion at least. This brings me to a rating board I haven't mentioned yet. The Bbfc. I honestly didn't know anything about this rating board before making this video, but I did notice in the past that my copy of Dragon's Dogma features a rating that is neither from the ESRB nor PEGI. When I looked at the website of this company, I only saw ratings for movies, so I have no idea if this is like a one-time thing. The only reason why I'm bringing up these guys out of nowhere is because they rated the earlier mentioned Dragon's Dogma 12+. This is a stark contrast with PEGI, who rated the game 18+. That's the difference between primary school and college. Basically, I think the Bbfc is doing it right. Or at least they did it right with this one game. I have no idea what they've been up to outside of Dragon's Dogma. Now to end this video, I want to quickly address one criticism one might have of this video. The simple question of why care about this in the first place. Well, I want all gamers to have the best possible childhood, and high age ratings will make certain parents wary of letting their child play. Secondly, PEGI is actually legally enforced in a few countries in the EU, making it so it's impossible for kids to buy games with higher age ratings than their actual age in those places. This means it's even more important the age ratings are indicative of the content in the games, and in my opinion calls for ratings being lowered even further. But if you have anything to add, anything to say, any story to tell regarding the topic of age ratings, the comments are as always open unless YouTube gets paranoid again. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you around.